It's a nice little hush. So has everybody had enough time to visit with our favorite professor over there? Joe Foster, raise your hand. All the way from Cherryfield, Maine, right?
All the way.
The blueberry capital of America. So thank you all for being here. This is the Patsy Bray Mahoney lecture series, who is named after one of our former patrons. Her family wanted to honor her by doing a lecture series for us. She died a few years ago. She had Alzheimer's. And so her husband and family wanted to keep her name alive and to offer these wonderful programs to have these very special guests here, besides you all. So today our guest grew up in, I know a little bit about you. Excellent. Our guest grew up in Brooklyn, New York, has a PhD, you could clap, it's okay.
Oh, well, there you go. Not Brooklyn, Maine, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Has a PhD in public policy. She worked in the Clinton administration, was a program director at the Harvard Kennedy School, and taught political science at Boston University. This is an unexpected path towards writing a book about 5 girls growing up in Downeast, Maine. So Gigi and her husband Jeff, where did you go? Back there. Thank you for coming. And their daughter Margot found themselves drawn to northern New England. They settled in New Hampshire, but also spent time in Downeast, Maine. Gigi's wonderful book is the result of her exploration of rural life, the impact of community, and the environment the 5 girls experienced. It is a hopeful book. Have any of you read it yet?
Oh, yes.
Okay, oh good. You're going to be in good conversation. And so in 1992, you established a fund. Is that right?
Oh.
The Downeast Exploration Fund?
Yes, actually, no, much more recently.
1922.
No?
No?
The Downeast Fund. I'm looking pretty good.
1822.
No, we actually founded the Exploration Fund after the book was published in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I say we, and it's
you'll
really
talk.
the girls.
Ah.
The girls. We funded it, but it's really the girls' fund. It's their idea and their.
That's
journey.
wonderful. So it offers opportunities outside of the academic realm for young people to explore possibilities to enrich their lives and to find experiences that might lead them to finding work that they love. So thank you for being here, Gigi George, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Come and take my place. Thank you, Mary Lou, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for being here. This Kennebunkport is a place that is very close to my heart because my husband and I were engaged here. And so we always love coming back to Kennebunkport. We come every summer because we split our time between Bedford, New Hampshire and Southwest Harbor. And it's just a really nice, of all the places we could stop, this is the place that we love to stop most. It's really good to be here this afternoon and to be able to talk with you all a little bit about Downeast and about the communities and the girls at the center of this book. I'm really so gratified to see so many of you have read the book. I'm really looking forward to questions and conversation, so I don't want to spend too long talking at you. I'd rather be in conversation with you all. But I do want to set the scene a little bit and talk a little bit about how I got to write about Downeast, how I came to find the conclusions that I came to, sort of the aha moments throughout the process of reporting on this book for 4 years and then writing it, and then show you some slides that will give you a little bit of a sense of the place and the girls, and obviously talk about the girls woven into that conversation that we'll have today. Let me just start with a very short reading, just sort of give you a sense of how the book opens, and then go from there and back up to how I came to write this book. So the scene setter is that it is 2016, and we're in Downeast, Washington County. It's about, and now as many of you may know, I know there are some who have actually spent a lot of time, or maybe from Downeast, Washington County, but for those of you who don't, it's about an hour north of Bar Harbor, right? But a world away. A caravan of 4,000 local fans has made its way to the Augusta Civic Center, and they're there to watch their hometown girls, the Lady Knights, play in the state's high school basketball championship. And anyone who knows Maine knows that the high school basketball championships, no matter what class you are incredibly meaningful and important. So these folks come from towns of just a few hundred people each. They're towns that are isolated and economically challenged, and the girls are serious underdogs. They do not win. But they pull out in 2016 an improbable victory. And they're led and inspired by their coach and trailblazing lobster fisherwoman, or fisherman, as Mainers really do say, Olivia Marshall. With 7 seconds left in the game, the Lady Knights still led by 2 possessions. The gold ball was in their grasp, and the girls were dancing a bit, as Olivia called their last timeout. "No fouls," she exhorted. "Just let them shoot." But they were smiling, and Olivia was smiling, and she said, "Man, I'm proud of you," and sent them on their way. When the game ended, the roars were deafening, and the night-long celebration began. Every one of Harrington's 950 residents felt as if they had carried home the coveted gold ball, along with neighbors from the adjoining towns of Addison, Cherryfield, Columbia, and Millbridge. They had made the 5-hour round-trip drive to Augusta's Civic Center. They had followed their hometown girls since the season's late November start from the gym at Narraguagus, where most of them had gone to school years earlier, to Searsport, Belleville, Jonesport, and other hamlets along the Downeast corridor. As the season chugged along and the girls ground their way toward an 18-2 record, the people here found themselves forgetting, for a couple of hours each week, about where they'd find the money for the unpaid heating bill, or how many times they'd fixed the leaking roof on their aging double-wide, about the way money wasn't coming in so fast once blueberry raking season had come and gone, or why this year's lobster yield wasn't even close to what they needed, ever since Donnie had succumbed to the lure of fentanyl, about where they'd go without their neighbors knowing to stock up on food for the long winter that lay ahead. They found themselves forgetting, and they cheered for the squad with an average height of 5'5". They cheered for their multi-talented coach, Olivia Marshall, who gave the girls something to strive for on and off the court. And they cheered for the possibility that this once robust set of communities could beat the odds in other ways. Because if a group of underdog girls could lift themselves up from the valley of the overlooked, surely they could too. So how did I end up in Downeast, Washington County from Brooklyn, New York, via Washington, D.C.? Well, it really is all due to my husband. I give credit where credit is due. Jeff has been coming to Maine for, he's also a New Yorker, born and raised, but he's been coming to Maine for quite some time. And when we met in New York and married, he turned to me and said, "You know, how do you feel about moving to northern New England?" I was an urban kid. I had not spent any time in rural places. I had spent most of my career both working in and studying urban school systems, urban places, whether it was my time in New York City with the public school system or down in Washington, where I had the good fortune to work in the White House. I was focused on urban issues. And so I looked at him and I said, you know, let's do it. Let's pick up and move north. And we did that. We spent a little bit of time in the Boston area, but we made our way up to New Hampshire, and Jeff had already had a place in Southwest Harbor where we spent a lot of time before our daughter was born. She's now 12. We had the luxury of being able to be up throughout the year in Maine, and we continue to do that as a tradition as much as possible through the years, and even while our daughter is now obviously in school age, middle school age. And as we were raising our daughter, Margot, I started to think more and more about the difference between urban and rural. And let me pause on that for a moment, because I think it's timely. Yeah, I think it's always timely to think about the urban-rural questions, right? But I think it's particularly timely now. We're heading into, no surprise, a pretty contentious political season. It feels like all political seasons are contentious. This is not a political book, as those of you who have read it know, but there is an overlay, and it's an unavoidable overlay, and I think it's one that we ought to be exploring and thinking about a lot, and I certainly thought about it when I wrote this book, and that is this whole idea of the urban-rural divide. What does it mean, and why don't we understand each other, right? And what is it about that seeming chasm between urban sensibilities and rural sensibilities? I started to think about that as our daughter was coming of school age, and this was early 2016, and we didn't know what was to come politically, certainly. And I said, you know, I'd really like to spend some time with kids in rural places. We were raising Margot in New Hampshire and Maine, both rural places. I was listening to the talk, the discourse, reading popular media, reading books about rural places, hearing what was being said. And what I was hearing was discordant to what I was experiencing and seeing. Through my eyes, through my daughter's eyes, through Jeff's eyes, through our neighbors. And I said, you know, there's such a negative din around all things rural in the sort of popular conversation, even in popular media, even popular culture, if you think about it, right? Not just politically. I thought there had to be something more than what we kept hearing in terms of sort of the dejection and the negativity and the sense of hopelessness that seemed to follow conversations about rurality and rural people, and particularly rural young people. So I set out to find out more. And we were up in Southwest Harbor. First person I thought of going to was someone I write about in the book, the Reverend Scott Planting, who was a minister for many, many years in Farmington, Maine, and then moved to the Bar Harbor area to run the Maine Seacoast Mission. Some of you may be familiar with the work of the Maine Seacoast Mission. They have a storied history. They help particularly families who live on the Maine islands and inland, particularly in Washington County, but other parts of Maine, more northern. They help them in many, many ways, including a famous boat that they take around to provide medical services. But they also help with a number of different childhood development, youth development programs. It's multifaceted, and they do wonderful work. And Scott is just a really great thinker and has a really good beat on what's going on in Washington County. And so I sat with him for a few hours in Bar Harbor, and I told him what I wanted to explore, and I told him what I was thinking, and he said, you really don't have to go far to find what you're looking for, to get those answers. Get in your car, go an hour up the road, and talk to some folks. And he introduced me to the school superintendent there. And he said, go talk to him, talk to some other people, I'll introduce you. I'm forever indebted to Scott for that, because I think that it would have been difficult for me to get that one foot in the door had he not made those introductions. But I will tell you, once he made those introductions, I was so warmly welcomed and brought into the fold by the school superintendent, by the staff at the school, the Narraguagus High School, particularly the high school principal, who I write about in the book. And she and I sat down, and I said to her, I really want to just talk to some young people. I just want to sit with them. Can I do that? And it's no big agenda. I just want to hear what's on their mind. And so she helped me set up some focus groups, informal focus groups, with a bunch of upperclassmen in the high school. And we sat around and spent some time together, and it was just a wonderful experience. These kids were very open. They were very willing to share their stories. And they were, interestingly, incredibly hopeful and optimistic, despite the many challenges that they faced. And they do face many challenges. And so I started to talk to them. We spent some time together. I walked away, and I had my first aha moment. And that was that the boys were doing okay. You know, they were good. They were lovely to talk to. But the girls had a little something extra going on. They were excelling. They were leaders in academics, in extracurriculars, in leadership in and outside of the school. And they were showing an extra spark. So I went to this high school principal and I said, you know, here's what I'm sort of observing and thinking about. Am I onto something? And she said, oh yes, absolutely. And it's been going on for a while. The girls are excelling, and it's not something that we are, you know, sort of pushing in any way, we think, but it is happening. And I said, well, I'd like to then follow some of these young women and talk to them and spend some time with them and understand from their perspective, through their lens, what it is like to grow up in a place like Downeast, Washington County. And I thought about it in many ways as a proxy for other rural places, although there are some unique aspects, right? There are unique aspects of every place. But I had done a lot of research going into this. I have a public policy background, a little bit of a sociology and political science background. And so I had done a lot of the reading going into these discussions and into this time. And so I had a sense of where things were academically, but I didn't want to stay on the academic track for this. I wanted to really get into the lives and the hearts and the sort of experiences of these young women, and through them, their communities. And so I found these 5 young women with the help of the high school principal and some other teachers and some other community members. And they were willing to have me follow them around for basically 4 years. And I don't know if they knew what they were getting into when they agreed to do it, but I hung around with them long enough that they knew I was serious, and they allowed me into their lives, and I am forever indebted to them for that. And so I spent time with them. And through that time that I spent with them, and the time, and I'll talk a little bit about each girl, but the time I spent with them was multifaceted, right? We sat in the lunchroom in the lunchroom of the high school at Narraguagus, but we also went out and about, and I followed them with their families in their workplaces. One is a lobster fisherman. We went out on the boat a number of times. I was a terrible sternman, but she was very patient with me, into the blueberry fields, and on and on and on. And they really opened the window for me, in addition to spending a lot of time just talking, into what their daily routines were like, and what their hopes and dreams were, and what their challenges were throughout that time. Through that, I came to the second aha moment, and that was that these young women and many of their peers, both female and male, they want to stay. They want to stay and build. You know, that goes to that other narrative that we keep hearing, right? That success for rural kids is leaving, is getting out. We hear it over and over again. For these young people, for many of them, you know, success is different. It's defined differently. And it takes the shape of wanting to be a part of the communities that they were raised in and wanting to help them move forward in the way that they feel progress is defined, which may not be the same way that their grandparents felt progress was defined, but it is their own way, their own connection, and that connection runs very deep both to the natural resources around them, which they are very tied to, whether it is through their work or in other ways. They feel that connection to place, both naturally and in terms of the community that surrounds them. And so while for some young people, leaving is the best option or the option that they prefer, for others, it really is building a life in the same, perhaps not town, but certainly in the same region or in a similar place to where they've grown up because they feel that connection. Which leads to my third aha moment, which is connected to that, which is why? Why do they want to stay so much? And one of the reasons is that the strength of community in places like Downeast, Washington County is very, very strong. And it's much stronger than many people seem to understand. And that if you are not on the ground and experiencing it, it is very easy to say, well, these places are so isolated. Yes, they're geographically isolated. You know, the girls would complain all the time about how you have to go an hour to go to the movies, if that, because the latest movie theater just closed, and, you know, to go bowling or to do anything aside from sort of the very sort of basic sets of experiences. Although that is changing a little bit in places like Millbridge is one very good example. But they do feel very much like whatever their circumstances, there are many, many people in their community, if not in their family, who will be there for them. And so whether it is that, you know, one of the young kids in the school has gotten cancer or is sick or is dealing with some very bad situation at home, or a lobster fisherman, right, can't fish because he got hurt, everyone will rally around and they will help. So, right, the lobster fisherman can't work, others will come and they'll do the hauls for him. As long as it takes, they'll figure it out. And so that just came back to me again and again and again. And so it was this moment of realizing that we don't talk about that enough when we talk about rural places. We talk about the tough things, and those things are real, but they are real in other places too. And so we have to think a little bit more, I think, and talk a little bit more, I think, about widening the lens beyond what we typically do. So let me do this. I'm going to just talk a little bit about each girl, show some slides, and then I want to open it up to questions and conversation, take this wherever everyone wants it to go. So the girls, for those of you who've read the book, this will all be familiar. I'll just do a thumbnail sketch. There are 5 young women. The first is Audrey. Audrey is the basketball star. She is a tremendous student athlete. She leads the Narraguagus team to gold ball victory. And she is offered a scholarship to Bates. And she is, you know, she's a hometown hero in a lot of ways. And everybody knows Audrey, and everybody's cheering for Audrey to go and do really great things at Bates. She's going to play basketball. She does. She starts on the team freshman year. And about the middle, after a couple of months at Bates, she starts to think about whether this was the right choice for her. In part, she misses home, but more than that, she realizes that she wants to be a speech pathologist. And the road for speech pathology at Bates is not a straight line road. Right? This is a liberal arts college. And so she's going over and over it with her advisor, and she's trying to figure out, well, how do I do this? Because I want to go back to my community, and I want to offer those services which are sorely needed. And I also want to be a part of that community. She grew up on the Back Bay Road in Millbridge. The Back Bay Road in Millbridge is this long, long road. And dotted along the road are all of these homes, many of which are owned and lived in by members of Audrey's family. She's multi-generational. Her grandmother is right up the hill. She rode her grandmother's horses growing up. This is not a wealthy family. It's a lobster fishing family. They do well lobster fishing, but anybody who knows lobster fishing knows that the capital that is required to maintain your trade is very, very significant. And so people think, oh, lobster fishermen, they make all this money, right? Well, not so much for most. Family business. And she decides freshman year to go back to transfer to UMaine in Orono. And everyone looks at her and says, why would you throw that opportunity away? And she says, I'm not throwing an opportunity away. I am doing what I think is best for me and what I think is best for my community. And I want to stay and build. And so that is Audrey. Josie is the next. Josie is sort of what we more typically think of as that success story, the rural success story. She is valedictorian of her class. She is admitted to Yale. She's the second ever in Narraguega's history to go to Yale, the first being her older sister. So this is an extraordinary family. It's a family of all girls. And there were 4 girls, and they all do really, really well. It's a family that is a homesteading family. The grandparents came from Pennsylvania, and they settled in the area, and they made their way with farming, and they still have a dairy farm in Harrington. It does really nicely. They're very much a part of the community. Josie goes off to Yale and finds herself caught between 2 worlds. She's very, very tied to her family, very tied to her community, and yet she is seeing and experiencing things that she never imagined she would have. She's a person of great faith, and she starts to question that, and she goes through this period of soul searching, and we spent a lot of time at Yale just talking about all of this stuff, and she, interestingly, you know, she is off doing some really interesting things right now. She majored in archaeology, and yet she still comes home, and she has said many, many times since the book has come out, you know, I really, I don't know if I'll ever come back to live, but I will always be a part of this community, and I know that I will come back to do things for this community and with this community if I'm able to. A third, Willow, is a tough story. Willow grew up in a family with a father who was physically abusive to Willow's mom and to her brothers, emotionally abusive to Willow. He's a drug abuser, and she, very, very tough circumstances, moved 7 times before she was 8, went to live with her paternal grandparents, and then, lo and behold, her grandmother is hauled off on an embezzlement felony count, and the grandfather is extremely controlling, and she has a tough time. And I met her when she was still going through some really difficult times. The interesting thing about Willow was, and is, that Willow was not a victim in her mind and in her heart. She had an incredible toughness about her, and yet was the sweetest young woman you would ever meet. She was the manager of the basketball team, and the girls all called her Mom. She goes through some really tough sort of situations, tough controlling boyfriend who she fortunately breaks away from while I'm spending time with her, but almost goes an even worse route, catches herself. The thing about Willow is not only is she not a victim, but she is so tied to Downeast, Washington County, to her town, to the wharf in which she works, and to the life Downeast, even though it has not given her much, right? But what it has given her is that community. And part of that community is the help and sustenance of her best friend, Vivian, the next girl in the book, who comes from a well-established Downeast family, and who really takes Willow in. And Willow ends up living with Vivian's family for a time. And really, the girls find their way together. Vivian has her own set of troubles. Her family is split apart by a very rough divorce early in her early years. She does not feel like she fits in the town. She wants to break away, and yet, interestingly, she ends up, she's a wonderful writer, very, very talented. She ends up moving with her boyfriend to Halton, Maine, which those of you who know it is not that different from Downeast, Washington County. And so she finds her way to another rural place, and yet she's much happier there, right? Because it is making her own way. She's making her own way and taking her rural sensibilities with her. And you know, she is now a nurse and married and a mom with a newborn as of a couple of months ago, and doing really, really great. And she goes through her own journey through the time that we're together. And then finally, McKenna. McKenna is the lobster fisherman. She's known that she wants to fish since she could walk. She begs her dad from the time pretty much she could talk to go out on that boat. And when she's 8, he finally says, okay, come on, let's go fish. And she never looks back. She's also an incredible athlete. She was a softball player and a freshman on the gold ball team. Even though she's not very tall, she was the only freshman and contributed to the win. She knows she wants to fish. She knows she wants to stay down east. She's a lobster fishing captain by the time she's 17. She is such a spitfire, and she is just full of great energy and confidence, and just a wonderful role model for other young women who want to pursue the fishing trade and who want to be out on the water. And she loves being down east. She says to me at one point, we're out on the boat, and she turns to me and she says, I feel sorry for all of those people who had to sit behind a desk all day and computer. This is my office. And she's right. It's hard work, but the rewards are great. If not monetarily, in other ways. So those are the girls. I'm gonna show a few slides to give you a sense of some of the young women. And 3 of them actually, when the book was published, you know, they were all, we did this on a basis of anonymity. I said, you know, really, the idea was not to say, oh, nobody in the community is going to know. Yeah, everybody knew who they were. There was no question about it. It's such a small set of communities. But it really was a way to give them more control, more agency over when and how and if they would reveal their real names to the broader public. So we did that, and I was really happy that when the book came out, the girls all had an opportunity right before the book was published, before we went to last edits, to read their sections and to come back to me, and this was very much co-created, and to come back to me and say, hey, this wasn't right, or I'm not comfortable with this, and so on and so forth. I was really, really gratified that from all 5 of them, there was only one Audrey came back and said to me, "Oh no, I was 14, not 13 when this happened." And I said, "Okay, we're good." And so when the book came out, 3 of them decided to reveal their names and actually did did a book tour with me on a number of occasions, and a couple of them have actually continued to do so. Audrey did something with me just about a month ago, not far from here actually, down in the Portland area, and that's been really nice. But you'll see the faces of some of the young women in these slides. So probably many of you are familiar with the location, but just to give you a little bit of a sense, right, of the geography, you can see sort of where it is all situated, and the towns that I spent time in were particularly the Millbridge, Cherryfield, Harrington, Columbia, Addison, and a little bit in Jonesport also, because Willow, his dad, ends up being in Jonesport. She spent some time there. So that's the basic geography. This is McKenna. So there she is on her boat. She caught a good one there. Like I said, she's just a phenomenon, and so is her mom, by the way. So she was the only one of the girls who was not 18 when I started following them, and so her mom was present at the first series of interviews. And when she turned 18 on February 14th, I said to her, your mom, whatever, you guys decide. But her mom and I had become friends. And so her mom continued. The 3 of us just continued to do stuff together throughout. And it was a really, really fun way to get to know her and her mom. One of the things I tried to do about halfway through the reporting was, once I had established the relationship with the girls and we were really in a good rhythm, I asked each of them, to the extent they were comfortable, if I could go back generations, mom, grandmother, and spend a little bit of time going back in that way. And so it was really nice to be able to spend that time with those family members, with the girls for whom the grandparents were living, but certainly with McKenna's mom. We had a lot of fun. Big personalities. This is actually McKenna's Holt Wharf. Her parents came with nothing, really. Then their dream was to build a wharf. And they did it. They did it with hard work and determination, and with the support of the community around them. And to this day, they've built something really meaningful and very much a part of the community. This is Audrey. The basketball star, she and I have actually done a bunch of events. We even did one at UMaine, her alma mater, last summer, and she is just she's an amazing sort of beacon of what it is like to be someone who really you can see it. She is going to be a leader of her community. She already is. She coaches basketball with the young kids. It's really adorable. They're like, this high. She and her boyfriend, I am sure they're on the road to being married, have now settled not far from where she grew up, in one of the towns down the road. And she is making her way, she's so proud to be from Downeast, Washington County, and so excited about what is to come. And she is, true to being a Mainer, right? She makes no bones about, look, things are not that easy, right? But she's doing speech pathology, she's working in the community, and she is just representing in a really meaningful and optimistic way. This is the driveway, Audrey's family driveway with all the lobster traps set up. And so, it's a very, very long drive. And the thing about Audrey is, and I say this in the book, she fished when she was very young. Unlike McKenna, she really hated fishing. She has these two brothers who fish as well. She goes out on the boat, and then she finally has she still fishes. She still fishes summers because it's how you contribute to the family, right? It's part of what you do. But she named her boat the No Interest, because she had no interest in fishing. Sorry, I hit the button too quickly. And so that is Audrey. This is Olivia Marshall, the coach. After they won the gold ball, she's a lobster fisherman, a great role model for young women in the community. A lot of these girls who go on to fish, whether it's full-time or part-time, have done it because of women like Olivia Marshall. She is the coach on the end there. And so after the girls won, the championship, her next boat she named the Gold Digger. She's a very successful lobster fisherman, and you'll see Audrey in the middle, and you'll see McKenna over next to Olivia there, and those are the rest of the teammates. She's not only an amazing lobster fisherman, she is a kick-ass lobster boat racer. She wins practically every summer in her class. And, it's really so fun. We've gone to see the races. We brought our daughter to see the races. It's hopeless. Our daughter is never going to be a lobster fisherman, but that's okay. She got on the boat anyway. But she's really a phenomenon as well. These women, they are fierce, right? In the best sense of the word, they are fierce. And it's just such a great thing to see that they rise up and they face adversity and they push through it. And it's not to say that they don't have bad days. Everybody has bad days, but they are very strong. This is Josie, valedictorian, went to Yale. She, again, she had this sort of back and forth period where she said, where do I fit in? And it was interesting to see her go through that struggle and yet come out the other side really feeling good about both parts of her life and feeling connected to both parts of her life. And she today she's down in Georgia now, but she's doing some some consulting. But she has been on digs really in lots of different places already. And she's been in Europe, and she's been in parts of Africa, and she's now back home. Yeah, she's had quite an interesting journey already at a very young age. This is the blueberry field, the blueberry barrens, where Vivian's family owns these farms, and she spent her, it's another path. She spent her childhood working on, raking blueberries and lifting these. I tried to lift one. There was no way I could lift one. Very, very strong. And also, again, the connection, right? The connection to the land, the connection to the sea that is in these young people and very much a part of them. Just to close, Willow, I didn't mention, just an incredible photographer. And these last couple of slides are just examples of her photography, and I include them for a couple of reasons. One is to show the beauty of Downeast, Washington County, a place that people don't think about, and yet is every bit as gorgeous as the most gorgeous parts of Maine, and we know how gorgeous Maine is. Two, the reason that she became a photographer is that she was mentored by her art teacher, Britt Francis, in the book. And it speaks to the value of, we talk about it a lot, but it can never be overstated, the value of teachers, the value of mentors in these young people's lives, and particularly in places that are so small. And Britt Francis, who comes from away, who was teaching in California, and comes and settles and makes this connection with these young people, and particularly young women. And young women like Willow, who really have a tough time, gets her to open up, to build trust, and then shows her that through photography, she has an outlet for all of the pain and all of the emotion and all of the difficulties. And it really helps Willow work through many of the difficulties that she's going through during her high school years. And so she's really very, very talented. Britt Francis, who's become a dear friend, and I are constantly telling her that she needs to, isn't that beautiful? She needs to, go to a gallery, sell, do this. We're hoping she needs to build her confidence. That's her then fiance. She's now married and has a daughter. And she's 2 daughters, actually, one from his previous marriage. And she loves being a mom. She still works on the wharf, and she does this beautiful photography on the side. Finally, that's me. My pathetic sterning. They put up with me. I went out with Olivia Marshall and her sister a few times. I went out with McKenna a few times. It was a lot of fun, but for those of you who have done it, it is very, very, very hard work. Finally. This is a poster that was in the main hallway of Narragansett High School. And it struck me every time I walked through. I spent a lot of time in those hallways. Staying isn't settling. And this is the message that the leaders of the community, the principal, are trying to send, because so much of what young people hear is that it is settling, that you have to get out to succeed, that there's nothing there for you. And so it just reminds us, right, that when we have these conversations as a society, that these kids are listening. And if we can sort of give back to them a little bit more of the sense that there is more than one pathway to success, and that you should not feel ashamed to say, I am going to stay, and I am going to make a life here. And it is not easy, but the rewards, while not perhaps materially as rich as going, the rewards are real, and they are meaningful. And I saw that and lived that, and I am forever grateful to have had that experience. So I will close with that and open it up to questions, comments, discussion.
I have a question.
Yes.
Social media, how much of it was a factor? I mean, it certainly is in more of an urban setting.
Yeah.
But down there, I'm sure that there's not a whole lot of internet access.
Yeah, it's interesting. I looked at that and talked to the girls and others about that a fair bit. It's there. It is so the internet. So there's a couple of levels of this. There's the question of internet access, and it is true that there are many parts of these areas where internet access is spotty. There is enough, certainly in the schools, certainly in certain parts of the towns, there's enough that these kids have access to social media. There is no question. I found that, and I think it'd be really interesting. It'd be actually really interesting. It's one area that I think is worthy of deeper study, as opposed to my anecdotal, this is all anecdotal, right? So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But I found that while it had an influence, and still does, and kids were attuned to it, that perhaps a little less so than in urban areas, and suburban certainly. These kids are busy. They all work from a very young age. They don't have a lot of free time. And so it almost is peripheral, not to a person, right? But it's interesting to see how much of their time is just taken up with other things, including just expectations that they have to meet, and that's part of how these families make their way. And that is still very much true, I think, as true as it was in the pre-social media age. Yes?
Could you talk a little about the Maine Seacoast mission, particularly the EDGE project?
Yeah.
I was so taken by the various leadership and other programs they offered, and I don't remember if all of the girls or some of the girls took advantage of that.
All of them experienced it in one way or another, and some were more involved than others. So for example, Josie was particularly involved and actually ends up getting a scholarship through the Maine Seacoast Mission. A couple of the other girls were involved at a younger age. Such an interesting, so first of all, the mission is just a really, really interesting organization with such a deep and long legacy, but particularly the EDGE program is a program that was established with a building in Cherryfield to provide after-school activities, programming, for young people in the region, in the area, in those surrounding towns. And they've actually gone on to expand their offerings over time, and they're doing more with the schools and in the schools, and they're so it started off as sort of almost an after-school activity thing, and now they're sort of going deeper and wider, and it's really interesting to see how that's grown. The leadership of the EDGE program at the time is in the book is Manny and Lois Parsons, and they are just this amazing couple. The Manny, very interesting. He was working at Harvard as a football, not the head coach of the football team there, but one of the assistant coaches. And he and his wife decide to move up to Maine. They make their way up to Cherryfield, and they are the inaugural, so he is sort of the inaugural leader of this. He is just an amazing role model for the young boys, especially, because he's this football coach, and he's this tough guy, but he's got a heart of gold, and he and I spent a lot of time, and then his wife actually runs the food pantry that's associated as well through the mission. It's right next door to the EDGE program. So he builds up this program, and it really becomes a safe haven for a lot of young people, particularly those who don't have a stable family and home life. And he becomes a wonderful mentor, especially to the boys. And we spend a lot of time talking about this. Every time I give these talks, the question comes up, what about the boys? What's going on with the boys? And, it was really, really fascinating to talk with him about his perspective on it and his sense of the lack of male role models for these young boys, in large part because in places like this, right, the men are out fishing, and they're not home as much, and there aren't that many male mentors in the schools. It's largely female run. A lot of the teachers are females, and so he tries to fill this void through the EDGE program for both boys and girls, but particularly takes a real interest in helping the boys see that they have more to offer, to build their confidence, to build their self-esteem, and finds that so many of them really are feeling beaten down by life, or feel like there aren't a lot of avenues for them. And so it is really interesting to see the way that the EDGE program helps cultivate some of the strengths, the inner strengths of boys that don't come out in the classroom so much, or in other leadership ways. But it's a really terrific program. It's still going strong. Manny has since retired, but yeah, it's terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yes, yeah, no, I can see.
I wondered if you could talk about, because it's such an amazing sociological study. And I was interested to hear you say that your sociological perspective. as an ethnographer, how did you safeguard your influence or your bias?
Yeah.
Or did you lean into it and like encourage her to be a photographer or whatever?
Yeah, excellent question. It was, so there's an inner struggle that goes on constantly because I approached it sort of in a repertorial way. Right? I went into it saying, I do not want to the extent that I can, I do not want to influence these girls' choices and their life. Not that I necessarily would, but I try to maintain as objective a face and demeanor as possible. And sometimes it was very hard because it was I'll give you one example. It was particularly hard with Willow, because we spent a lot of the time that we spent together, quite a bit of time we spent sort of after hours in the school cafeteria. And we did that, frankly, because of all of the young women, she was the one who I knew would feel the least safe. And I wanted her to feel comfortable in an environment that she felt at home in, and home was not that. And so there were a few moments, there was one in particular when I really wanted to be like, no, don't do that. And that was when she's gotten out of this terrible relationship with a very controlling boyfriend, actually fiance, and she comes and she's all excited one afternoon, and we're sitting in the cafeteria, and she says, I am thinking of moving to Michigan. And I said, great, well, what are you going to do in Michigan? And she says, well, I had this long time online relationship with a guy she'd never met in person. And he asked me to come out to Michigan. And I'm thinking, sitting there, I'm just holding my tongue and trying, but I knew at that moment it wasn't my place to tell her. Now, had she decided, the story ends well. She decides that she isn't going to go to Michigan, and in part because she loves Downeast so much that she can't leave it, and then ends up meeting the person who eventually becomes her husband, a lovely, lovely guy. Jeff and I visited with them. We try to go out there to visit with them every summer, and he's a scallop fisherman, and he goes down actually to Gloucester to scallop fish, and then he does other fishing other times of year, but just a lovely, running after us with a big bag of scallops and come again, and it's all good. But it was very hard. It was very hard. It was hard with all of them. And I'm not, but I really felt like it wasn't my place. And had she said, oh, I'm getting on a plane to Michigan, I think I might have let slip to the principal, she's going to Michigan. But I also like to think that there would have been a safety net in her community, and that goes back to that, right? That there would have been folks who would have said, Willow, maybe not. Let's take a step back. Maybe not. But it was hard. I tried. I don't know how much I succeeded, but it's always a line, right, in these things. It really is. Yes, and then I'll come back. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm curious, the compelling story that you tell addresses the power of place and this sense of community. So they're not settling really because of the community, but I wonder about the economic opportunities. We've heard about fishing and blueberry raking and a speech pathologist in the school, but other than that, is there another reason for them to stay economically where they know that they can find employment that might be fulfilling in ways that are important?
Yes, so this is the tension, right? That the job opportunities are somewhat limited. Now there are certainly in the medical field, right? There are opportunities. A lot of the young women end up getting their CNA or CRNA. They're not high-paying jobs. They may go on to become an RN, and that is considered successful. So there are, you know, the medical centers are not necessarily right there. There are some limited small, you know, small avenues. There's obviously Ellsworth. It's a bit of a trek. A lot of young people do end up getting work in Ellsworth. There's Machias. So there is a band around which there are limited economic opportunities, but they are limited, particularly in the sense that the pay tends not to be very high. There's a ceiling. I spent a lot of time, and I write about him. It happens to be Josie's uncle with a really, really sharp guy who runs the Sunrise County Economic Council, which works on building economic opportunities on economic development in the region. And they, you know, he was so patient with me because I was so interested in this question. I kept going back to him and back to him and back to him, and he was very generous with his time and with his insights. And, you know, they are working on some new pathways for economic opportunity. I think that it's a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of what they've found. You know, there's the aquaculture, which has its own set of tensions and not necessarily a favored path for a lot of folks. And there are other sort of farming opportunities. Cherryfield does. It's really interesting. There's been a lot of sort of organic farming building up. So there are pockets. I am no expert on this, but I would say this. I would say while it is limited, there are some opportunities, and for kids who really want to stay because they feel that power of place, it may take having a couple of jobs. It may take piecing something together, but they do find a way. And what I hear a lot is, you know, it's okay. You know, I'm making a life, and this is the life that I am choosing. And when I hear that, I sort of try to take a step away from that, well, you should, or right, or this is the meaning of success. So it's kind of from where you sit. Yes, sir.
Do you have any plans to do some kind of an addendum or a volume 2 in 5 or 10 years to see where they are?
If they will let me, I might. I joke with them. So we have this group text, and I have this group text with the girls, and it's very funny because you can't get them on the phone. You know, that's and so it's kind of fun because we sort of go back and forth every so often on things, and when we were putting the fund together, they were sort of very active on the group text, but. I sort of do drop them hints every once in a while, and we'll see. I mean, I think it might be fun to do an article, just as a follow-up. Yeah. Yes.
Speaking of follow-up,
Yeah.
it was delightful to see the pictures of the girls. Did you consider putting photos of any kind in the book?
Oh, no. I'll tell you why. Well, I shouldn't say no. My editor and I talked about it, and we decided in the end not to, because at that point we were preserving the girls' identities. And so it really would have been a place, which would have been, you know, perhaps, but I think it might have just left readers saying, well, why don't you have pictures of the girls? So we decided not to. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yes.
A question about community. Often as communities grow and change over time, the quality of that connection changes. In the course of your work in that community, did you see some of that happening?
I did not. I don't think it was a long enough period to see that type of change. Now, what I will say is where I saw something, right, was, and I actually didn't see it because we were all locked in our houses, was during COVID, right, what I experienced through staying in touch with the girls. So I had finished, I had actually was scheduled to finish the book right when COVID hit, and I asked my editor if I could have a little more time to follow what the experience of these young women and the communities were through the early months of COVID, and I did that, and I wrote in the book a little bit about that. And so where I saw or felt change was around how they coped with, particularly in the lobster fishing industry, right, where lobster is a communal food. It is a luxury food. It is food that you eat in restaurants. And so there you were, and whether they were lobster fishermen or not, they were all affected by the sense that there might not be in their minds a lobster fishing industry when we came out the other side, if we came out the other side. And so in that sense, I sort of rode the wave of change. And there is a little, I did see on the margins, since then, since publishing the book, you can see on the margins that there has been a little bit of that overflow influx of, what I think we're all experiencing in more rural places, of folks coming from more urban places and settling. And Downeast, Washington County is, a place like Addison, a little bit. Addison has always had a little bit of that. I think it's gotten a little bit more of it. A little bit of retirees. There's some tension around that. It's interesting to see and feel just on the margins. Yeah. Yes, in the back.
It seems so ready-made for, is there been interest for movie rights or
I have a wonderful agent who, thank you for that, thank you. I do, I have a wonderful agent who has actually produced some, I won't name them, but some significant shows, and we're hopeful. The writer's strike did us in a little, because that was when we were pitching. It just hit it at the same time. So we're hoping it would be nice. We'll see. Thank you for that, though. I appreciate that. Yes.
You are such a great speaker. It's so wonderful to hear you. I mean, a brilliant writer, of course, but you speak so eloquently. So I just have to say thank you. It's been delightful.
Thank you.
But my question is about the actual writing itself. So how many interviews were there? I mean, you mentioned a series of interviews with the parent, and then I'm assuming there were multiple interviews across this time. So could you talk about taking all of this, corralling it, and doing the actual writing, coming up with the actual storytelling?
Yeah, there's a lot of interviews. So over the course of the time, I think I had counted at some point that I spoke with, hundreds of folks either in or somehow connected with the community. Now, obviously, the vast majority of the time was spent with the 5 young women, and then by extension, teachers, family members, other mentors. Corralling it was interesting. So I joke about, I digitally recorded every interview, every interaction where it was feasible, and certainly every interview. And so I ended up with reams and reams of transcripts, and I also sort of did the old-fashioned, I don't know if anyone knows or remembers these old reporters' notebooks that you carry around. And so when I interviewed, I as a backup would also take notes in those notebooks. So I ended up with boxes and boxes and boxes of notebooks and transcripts, and they sort of took over. Looking at Jeff, because he took over. He said, "When are you going to get rid of them? What are you doing with these boxes?" And I actually literally laid them out. I had this sort of old-fashioned way of doing it, because staring at the screen at transcripts is very hard, especially when you're doing 5 stories. And my editor kept saying, "You need to do an outline," which I didn't want to do, but I did, and it was the right thing to do. But I did literally sort of then just go through the transcripts and highlight and go through it was wading through a lot, but it was also it was not as crazy as it sounds. I would walk away from particularly the time with the girls, and I would typically just sit down and email myself takeaways that I just really felt, important or like something I wanted to follow up. And that was really helpful. That turned out to be really helpful in the course of writing. Yes?
This particular sign, when I read that in the book, I was just like, it smacked me in the face. I grew up right here, and I graduated from high school in 2003, so before social media, so Kennebunkport felt like a more insulated place. Certainly not as much as Washington County, but kids can't wait to leave Kennebunk. There's nothing to do in Kennebunk. That's what we're told. That's with each other, that's what we believe. But I can't tell you how many of my high school peers, as 30, 35-year-old adults with families, have found themselves back here. My children are attending the schools that I attended. And it's not just 4 or 5 people. I mean, it's 25, 30, 50 kids that are back here because this is just a great place to live, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, how aware are they as young adults of this message? I mean, is it really shoved down their throats that you have to leave to be successful? Because I grew up here, like I said, and it was you have to go to college, college. And guess what? We're kind of in a crisis where we're not going to have electricians and plumbers and things like that.
Yes.
There is, and electricians and plumbers make great money.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
And they don't have student debt, right?
Yes.
So,
You nailed it. Well, they are aware. It's really interesting. And first of all, I'm just fascinated by the story of all of your peers coming back because I'm thinking a lot. Well, anyway, that is really interesting because it runs so counter to the narrative, right? And I think it's happening a lot more than we are acknowledging, and so that's key. They're aware. It's just a really short anecdote. I'll just a really quick one. And I write about this. I write about this, but it speaks to that, and that is the principal of the high school. Remarkable woman. She's since retired from the high school, but is doing something really important right now, and that speaks to the story. She lobbied very hard for the region to get a vocational center, essentially, right? A CTE. Washington County is the only region that didn't have one. There were a series of town meetings around this when they had gotten the grant. They finally got the grant. She worked so hard at this. They got the grant. Then they had some meetings to talk about the siting. So I went to one of those meetings, and first of all, the place was packed to the rafters. I mean, there was no space. People were overflowing. And why were they there? They were there because of exactly what you're talking about, because they want their kids to have those opportunities to be plumbers, to be engineers, to be electricians, to work in the community, right? And they wanted to make sure that it was going to be sited close by, in a place where these kids could get there because transportation is a problem, right? And Washington County is big. And so, person after person, these big burly guys in their, plaid jackets who had just come off the fishing boat. And, you knew they did because the place, smelled like lobster. And so they are standing up and saying, I don't want my kid. I don't want to, first of all, I don't want my kid to leave. My kid doesn't want to leave. I want this opportunity for them. And what am I going to do? I'm going to go into debt, all of this money, to send my kid to a college where they're not going to come back, or they're not going to come back with the skills that they need because the skills don't match the employment opportunities. And so it really is important. And it's think about the narrative. I think more and more people are acknowledging and recognizing and giving respect to the trades. But as a society, we continue to, right, say, oh, well, the trades, go for a 4-year degree. And that's, they both ought to be seen as success, I think. Anyway. Well, thank you so much. This was a joy. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. We do have another lecture next Saturday with 2 art writers, and so maybe you'll return. But thank you for being here today.
Thank you,
This is
Mary.
our highly coveted history book set.
Oh my gosh.
With the couple of hats for you and Jeff and a mural book. So
Oh,
thank you
thank
very
you
much.
so
for being here.
much. Thank you all. This is great. I love it. Thank you. You were an amazing audience. Thank you so much for being here today.
Can you just speak